r/nosleep. Posted by ItsMeRoyale. The neighborhood I grew up in had only one important rule: during the exact 30 minutes following midnight, never fall asleep and never listen to the echoes. My parents were not the most well-off people. Consequently, we found ourselves moving around from one place to another quite frequently when I was younger. It was at this point, my family came across the opportunity to rent a house in a neighborhood called Hideco Hills, a small suburban area that sat at the far edge of a town. The pricing was astonishingly low, which was what drew them there in the first place, but it leaned on a particular requirement stated in the contract. As you can see, our cost value is spectacular. I can assure you, it's better than any other place in the vicinity, the agent politely stated as he passed my mother and father the paperwork. Though, it hinges on one very important rule which everyone in the neighborhood always abides by. And what is that? My father questioned. Refer to the bottom of the sheet, sir. The rule is fairly simple to follow. Every sunset, over the course of 30 minutes after midnight, there are what we call echoes. They are voices that resound throughout the neighborhood. We do not know their source to this day. He continued. Everyone in your family must wear a pair of earphones, covering both ears, while listening to very loud music. This is to drown out any sliver of sound that may emanate from the echoes. You must keep them on during the entire 30 minutes. Under no circumstances should you take them off. You must not fall asleep either, doing so may decrease your chance of survival. Also, I would highly recommend being prepared ahead. He was interrupted by a small chuckle from my father. I'm sorry. This is supposed to be a joke, right? You do this to every client? The agent did not smile nor laugh back. His expression remained dead serious. Sir, this is not a joke. You have to obey this rule with great caution if you are going to live here. We have a store in town where you can purchase earphones and pocket-sized audio players for your family. And like I was trying to say earlier, be prepared 15 minutes ahead of time. That was all I heard of the conversation before my parents ushered my older brother Colton and I out and talked to the agent in private. I never figured out what they discussed in their lengthy debate, but one idea was clear: my parents finally decided we were moving into our new home. On moving day, my father handed me a pair of earphones and an iPod. He then explained to me the rule one more time and told me to repeat it. Why can't I go to sleep during that time, Dad? I asked. Because the agent told us a person fell asleep once and he didn't realize it when his earphones accidentally came loose. What happened to him? He looked away without answering. After a few moments, he put his right hand on my shoulder. Look kiddo, just follow the rule for me, okay? No more questions about this. I told Colton to do the same. I heeded the advice even though I craved for some answers. On that same night, 15 minutes prior to the handle of the clock striking 12, my father ordered the family to gather in the living room. He wanted to make sure that all of us were following the instructions correctly. I could tell he feared the consequences if we did not. We all simultaneously put on our earsets, plugged them into our devices, and turned the music up significantly. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, leaning my back against the couch, while my father and mother sat together across from me. Colton rested in a beanbag chair next to the fireplace, bobbing his head up and down to the beat of the music. He was years older than me and, at that moment, I was surprised as to how calm he was. Meanwhile, my eyes dashed back and forth from the concerned faces of my parents to the clock. I fidgeted with my fingers, trying to dampen the butterflies in my stomach. I remember feeling the clamminess of my hands and the trembling throughout my body that seemed endless. I did not notice that the grandfather clock had already struck the number 12. It seemed at first that nothing had occurred. However, as I began to look around, I felt the air around me change. I cannot fully explain it even now, but I knew that the atmosphere felt different somehow. An unusual chill seeped into the room and the tiny hairs on my neck stood tall as if someone were breathing down my back. That was when the tremors started. I can only describe them as cold ripples coursing through the carpet below my feet. I could sense every pulsation and it felt so mesmerizing. An extreme feeling of curiosity began to overwhelm my fear. I had a sudden inclination to take one of my earphones out, just to hear what was causing the ripples. It will only be a quick moment, a thought soothed me. You really want to hear what it sounds like, don't you? Come on, it won't hurt to hear a tiny bit, tiny bit, tiny bit. I snapped out of it when my father gripped my arm, preventing me from taking my own earpiece out. I rubbed my sweaty forehead and thanked him silently. The ripples continued like that for exactly 30 minutes. Every single night. Each time, My father would take his set of earpieces out first and ensure that it was safe for everyone else to do so. We continued this practice for many weeks, perfecting it as we went, eventually leading up to a day when Karen visited our neighborhood. Karen was Colton's best friend and they both attended a high school that was miles across the state. She arrived at our front door in an afternoon and we all had an enjoyable conversation over lunch. The mood only grew serious when my father mentioned the echoes to her. He clarified the whole process and the steps that she needed to take. He also provided her a spare ear set to connect to her device. Around 11:40 p.m., my parents told me to go fetch Karen and Colton from the room upstairs. I quickly arrived back with Karen reluctantly trailing behind me as she descended the staircase towards the living room. I could tell she was a little uneasy about the whole situation, yet she was trying her best not to convey it. My father brought a chair from the dining room for her, and the rest of us sat in our usual spots. At 11:45 p.m., he reiterated the familiar instructions. We all placed the pieces into our ears, each of us making sure the other was prepared. Even after doing this countless times, my anxiety still got a hold of me and I could not stop the shivers from taking over. I glanced at Karen, who was also taking deep inhalations to calm herself down. She reminded me of myself on the first day. The uneasiness only heightened once the clock struck 12. The tremors commenced and all of us experienced the usual movement beneath the floor for a few minutes. I glanced at Karen again. She appeared to be handling it well, though a bit of confusion was plaguing her. That brought me a bit of relief. Then, the unthinkable happened. To this day, I'm not sure if Karen's device was malfunctioning or if she had not started the music on time, but I noticed that her face went completely blank. No emotion. No reaction. It was as if her soul had been pulled out of her. In that silent moment, time itself froze. I recall my father first bolting to his feet when he realized what was happening, frantically herding all of us into a corner of the room away from Karen. Colton was also shouting, though I could not hear any of it, and my father held him back, attempting to calm him down. We all watched in shock as Karen's pupils dilated until the irises of her eyes twisted into a pure black. She shot up abruptly and stared at all of us, her gaze shifting from face to face until it locked on Colton. A hint of red began to fill up her scleras, until all the white in her eyes had practically vanished. I was completely motionless, attempting to comprehend what had just transpired. That was when Karen spoke. Although all of it was inaudible, I managed to put together some words. "Colton, they sound so beautiful." 2 tears streamed down Karen's cheeks and her lips stretched into a twitching smile. She heaved the earphones and her phone away, the object slammed into the wall and shattered on impact. Suddenly, everyone found their urge to move. I huddled next to my mother while Colton and my father tried to approach Karen from the sides. "They don't want to hurt you. They promise." Karen was weeping at this point while maintaining the same crooked smile. She breathed uncontrollably once she spotted Colton and my father advancing forward. My father reached his arm out slowly. "Karen, if you can hear me, please." She looked at my father and her smile immediately disappeared. Her hand dashed forward and grasped my father's neck, strangling him. My younger self stood back with my mother, unable to do anything. Thankfully, Colton stepped up and grabbed Karen's arms, dragging her away from my father as best as he could. Together, they wrestled with her as she fought back furiously, clawing at the air, punching, and screaming. It was a miracle that none of their earphones came loose. After a few tense seconds, they managed to push her into the hallway and by this time, her eyes had rolled up into her head. Colton inched towards one of the closets and thrust it wide, pushing Karen into the small enclosure as my father swiftly locked its handle. I saw Colton lean against the door, crying. My father limped back into the living room with a torn shirt and bleeding wounds from the struggle. I cannot define the emptiness that remained, but all I can say is that I went and hugged my father tightly, never letting go. We waited for the time to finish while the closet door rattled and shook on its hinges the whole 30 minutes. We were terrified if it would give way, but, by some grace, it held solid. Once it was safe to do so, we all took off our ear sets and gradually approached the door. It was too silent. My father unlocked the handle and slowly turned it. It opened to reveal Karen's mutilated body slumped on the ground, her scarlet eyes wide open and her face covered in long stripes of blood because she had lacerated herself to death. A short afterward, I rejoiced when I finally had a chance to leave that forsaken neighborhood. The scars it has left on me will be a constant reminder for the rest of my life. Those experiences are a blatant indicator of the forces at work in this world, many of which we pray we never encounter. Even still, there was one idea that I had failed to recognize until recently. My neighborhood's name was Hydco Hills. Hide co. Echo die.